Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. Hope you're all having a great day. We're going to get back into our very basic Bible study, and we're going to be looking at chapter 38. Remember last time we saw how Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery and he wound up in Egypt. Now the focus shifts back to what's going on with his brothers, one in particular. And this is a difficult chapter for me to remain basic on because it's kind of complicated. So we'll go through it, and I'll try to make it as basic and clear as I can without getting too detailed. But let's get started and see how we do on this. Okay, with God's help, we'll get through it and learn something. Okay, let's look at chapter 38. And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. So Judah was one of the brothers that came up with the idea of killing Joseph, remember? And these older brothers also took part in murdering the Shechemites. Now he's separated from his brothers. He's gone about 15 miles away, according to my footnotes in my study Bible here. And let's see what happens to Judah. And Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er. If you remember, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were trying to maintain the integrity of the chosen line, and they went to great pains to not intermarry with the Canaanites. We saw that Esau did so and created a lot of problems, and even more in the future. And now we see Judah marrying a Canaanite. So let's see what goes on. He's got one son. Now verse 4. Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. And she bore still another son and named him Shelah. And it was at Chezib that she bore him. So she's had several sons, and just like some of the other chapters, we wonder why we have this genealogy, but we're going to see why in part in a little bit. Verse 6, Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. We don't know anything more than that. Whether the Lord took it directly or he used a human tool to take it. If he was wicked, he was probably doing things and associating with people that were capable of killing him. But whatever, it was God's will that his life be taken. Verse 8, Then Judah said to Onan, Go in to your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. It was so important to perpetuate these different these different lines, that there was a practice where if a woman's husband died, then the brother of the deceased would basically take his place in regard to fathering children, but those children would retain the name of the deceased father, and therefore the genealogical line would be unbroken. So Verse 9, and Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so it came about that when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. So he is purposely trying not to have any sons through his brother's wife. Verse 10, but what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. So the first two brothers are gone because they were wicked and not doing the Lord's will. Verse 11, then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought, I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now Judah, it's possible he was thinking, well, this Tamar is kind of a jinx, and there's something going on here, and I don't want my youngest son to die, so I'm going to put her off. You just go live with your father, and then when this young son of mine grows up, then I'll give him to you to perpetuate your first husband's line. Verse 12, now after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, and he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. The sheep shearing time, I'm told, in reading some of the commentators, was a big deal. And it was a time of partying and sometimes debauchery. So he's taking his friend here up there to sheep shearing. And it's not unlikely that they're going to do some partying there. Verse 13, and it was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had grown up and she had not been given him as a wife. Now she's taking this custom seriously, and she's going to take action herself, because she apparently can see that Judah is not going to meet his obligation to give him this youngest son to help her father children and perpetuate her husband's line. Verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Here we see the beginning of another deception. We've seen this over and over and over again, where people hide their face, change their clothes. One more deception here. And she wants some guarantee that she's going to get paid. That's her plan, and Judah's about to fall into her trap here. Verse 17, he said, therefore, I will send you a kid from the flock. She said, moreover, will you give a pledge until you send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So he's giving her some guarantee that he's actually going to send this agreed upon payment. His seal would be something like a signature stamp, very identifiable. And it could have been on a cord around his neck, or it could have been on a cord attached to his staff. That might be why she asked for all three, because they were kind of connected. We don't know for sure. But he agreed. and went into her, and she conceived. Verse 19, then she arose and departed, and removed her veil, and put on her widow's garments. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of her place, saying, where is the temple prostitute who was by the road at Enaim? But they said, there has been no temple prostitute here. Temple prostitution was women that were set aside. Somehow they rationalized away that this form of prostitution was somehow okay. I guess we can rationalize anything away, but they were doing it in the name of, religion. But at any rate, she was not there. Verse 22, so he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, there has been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. After all, I sent this kid, but you did not find her. In other words, I tried to pay her, couldn't find her. So let her just keep the stuff, and we'll keep it quiet, because I don't want to be made to look like a fool. Verse 24, now it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. I guess back then, parents or the head of these clans had the power to pass judgment like that, pass sentence. Verse 25, if it was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not have relations with her again. So Judah immediately realizes what had happened. And he was convicted, knowing that he had not met his obligation, and that she, in order to preserve her line, had gone to these great steps. And she was actually more in God's will than he was. And it came about at the time she was giving birth that, behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth. One put out his hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Remember, that was important because firstborn got special benefits. Verse 29. But it came about as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Verse 30. And afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. The chapter ends there, and then it's going to go back to Joseph in Egypt. But why this discussion about the genealogy and all of this? Well, even though it's difficult to follow all these genealogies and we get tired of trying to sort it out, I know in my mind I have a hard time sorting these things out. But we're going to find out later that Tamar has preserved the actual line through which Jesus Christ the Lord will be born. And this genealogy is going to be mentioned later on, verifying this fact. But keep in your memory banks here that this son is named Perez. We're going to see further ahead in chapter 46 another genealogy, and we're going to see Perez mentioned again there. And if we go way ahead and look at the first book of the New Testament in Matthew, we're going to see this genealogy again there. It says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It says, to Abraham was born Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, and to Jacob Judah and his brothers, and to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And it goes on through this whole genealogy all the way down to Christ the Lord. So we're going to see the significance of this all the way back in Genesis, God showing this genealogy. And why is that important? Well, to you and me, it's important because it's God's way of saying, I do what I say. I promise that Israel and his descendants were going to be a blessing to all the nations of the world. And this is how, through Savior Jesus Christ. And how miraculously God, through all these centuries, thousands of years, has protected that genealogy, working in the background, working overtly, but he's protected this genealogy. It's just amazing. And to us, it just screams, this is real events, real history. All this really happened. It can all be traced back. It's not once upon a time, long, long ago story, but it's very precise and detailed. And this is just one more step as we draw closer and closer and closer to the incarnation of Jesus Christ the Lord, the Savior of the world. Anyway, we'll stop there, and we're going to flip back to what's going on with Joseph next time. I hope this has been interesting for you, and hope you'll watch the next one. In the meantime, God bless, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.